Sometimes life writes stories stranger than any novel. A man builds an empire, loses the woman he once loved, and years later walks into a wedding hall only to find her again dressed in white, standing at the altar, but not waiting for him. What happened next is a tale of heartbreak, chance encounters, and love that refused to die quietly. Julian Blackwood had lived his adult life by one rule: never let them see you weak. From the moment he was a boy, growing up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with a single mother who cleaned houses to keep food on the table, he swore he would never be looked down on again. Every late night studying finance, every ruthless deal struck in Manhattan boardrooms, every sleepless flight across continents was fueled by the same determination to prove himself. And he had. At 38, he was more than just successful. He was the face of Blackwood Enterprises, the man whose skyscrapers redefined the New York skyline. The press adored his sharp suits and sharper quotes. Forbes put him on its cover not once, but twice, calling him the King of Steel and Glass. Women smiled at him in photographs, investors trusted him with billions, and competitors respected him, even if they hated him. But power has blind spots, and Julian discovered his when he fell in love. Catherine Sinclair wasn't like the women who usually crossed his path at galas and fundraisers. She had come from money, yes, but she carried herself with an independence that intrigued him. She had a laugh that could pull him out of even his darkest moods, and she wasn't afraid to call him out when he got too lost in work. For a time, Julian believed Catherine was the balance his life needed. They had talked about a future, a home outside the city, children who would grow up with the security Julian had never known. He thought she understood that all the towers and contracts were for her, for them. But somewhere along the way, things soured. Catherine grew restless, impatient with his long hours. She accused him of caring more about meetings than about her. He argued back, promising that it was only temporary, that the sacrifices would be worth it. Then, one night, without warning, she ended it. No screaming fight, no final plea, just a cold conversation where she said she needed more than he could give. Weeks later, he learned through whispers that she had found that more in the arms of Charles Harrison. Charles had been a thorn in Julian's side since their 20s. He was born into money, unlike Julian, and treated every boardroom like a playground. Where Julian fought for every inch, Charles inherited entire empires. The two men had battled over contracts, real estate, and public perception. That Catherine had chosen him of all people was a just betrayal. It was humiliation. And now, years later, as Julian stared at the gold-trimmed wedding invitation on his desk, it felt like the final blow. Catherine Sinclair, soon to be Catherine Harrison. He set the card down carefully, as if it might burn him, and looked out the window at the towers he had built. He had everything a man could want, everything but the one thing that mattered most. The city was loud that day. Horns, chatter, the endless hum of life. Julian wandered into Greenwich Village like a man searching for air. He needed to be somewhere that didn't remind him of Catherine, somewhere far from the polished lobbies and crystal chandeliers of his usual world. That's how he found himself standing in front of a tiny cafe with peeling paint on the window and a chalkboard sign boasting "World's Best Cookies." Inside, the place smelled of espresso and sugar. Students hunched over laptops, locals flipped through newspapers, and a barista hummed along to the radio. No one gave him a second glance as he slipped into a corner booth. For once, he was invisible. "Coffee? Black," he told the waitress without looking up from his phone. "Wow," a voice teased. "Adventurous choice." You want me to bring you a glass of water too? Or is caffeine misery enough for today? Julian looked up, startled. The waitress was young, her curly hair pulled back, her apron slightly stained from rushing between tables. Her name tag read Vanessa. She wasn't flirting, wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply mocking him lightly, playfully, like he was just another customer. He blinked, then surprised himself with honesty. Bad day, he admitted. Then, after a pause, bad month. Vanessa arched an eyebrow. Then you need a cookie. House policy. Chocolate chips fix 90% of problems. The other 10%? Well, we haven't figured that out yet. For the first time in weeks, Julian chuckled. It felt rusty, like using muscles long forgotten. Add one to my order, he said. Then, impulsively, actually, make it two. Join me when you're on break. She tilted her head. Bold move, suit. You assume I want to spend my precious 10 minutes listening to you complain. I'll make it worth your while, he said, instantly regretting the phrasing. I mean, I could use the company. That's all. Something in his voice must have softened her skepticism. She gave a small shrug. Fine. 10 minutes. When she finally slid into the booth with her tea and 2 cookies, Julian found himself studying her. She wasn't polished like Catherine, wasn't dressed to impress, but there was an ease about her, a groundedness that disarmed him. She asked questions no one in his world dared. So your fiancé is marrying someone else. Are you heartbroken or just angry your ego got bruised? He stared at her, shocked. Anyone else would have tiptoed around him, but she cut straight to the bone. Both, he admitted. She didn't just leave me. She left me for my rival. And now she's sending me an invitation like I'm supposed to clap politely from the sidelines. Vanessa bit into her cookie and shook her head. Sounds like a soap opera. But let me give you the free version of my terrible advice. You don't have to go. No one's forcing you. I do have to go, Julian said quietly. In my world, disappearing means weakness. It means she wins. Vanessa studied him, and for a moment, Julian felt unnerved. She wasn't impressed by his suit, didn't care about his money. She just saw him a man trying not to bleed in public. It was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Julian couldn't get her out of his head. The next day, he returned to the cafe, telling himself it was for the cookies. It wasn't. He wanted to see her again. When she brought his coffee, he noticed the exhaustion in her face. Her eyes were ringed with fatigue, her smile thinner. Rough night? He asked before he could stop himself. Vanessa hesitated, then sighed. My mom's in the hospital. Heart problems. She needs surgery, but insurance doesn't cover all of it. I was there until 3 a.m. She shook her head as if realizing she'd said too much. Anyway, not your problem. Enjoy your coffee. But it was his problem now. The thought of her working endless shifts while her mother's life hung in the balance struck something deep inside him. He thought of his own mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything so he could climb out of poverty. He owed women like them more than indifference. When Vanessa sat across from him on her break, Julian leaned forward. I have another proposal. One night, 6 hours, pretending to be my girlfriend at the wedding. In exchange, I'll pay for your mother's surgery. All of it. Vanessa froze, her cup halfway to her lips. That's not funny. I'm not joking, Julian said steadily. This way, you get what you need, and I get to walk into that wedding with my head held high. Everyone wins. She stared at him like he was insane. Why me? You could hire a model, an actress, anyone used to your world. Because you're real, Julian said simply. You're the first person who's made me laugh since she left. You're not pretending, not trying to get something out of me. And that's exactly what I need." It was madness. She knew it. But the desperation in his voice mirrored the desperation in her heart for her mother's health. After 3 sleepless nights, Vanessa picked up the phone and dialed his number. "Your offer," she said. "Does it still stand?" "It does," Julian replied without hesitation. And so, the deal was made. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparations. Julian arranged for Vanessa's mother's surgery at the best cardiac center in the city, quietly covering every expense. Vanessa visited her mother daily, telling her not to worry, that help had come from an unexpected place. Rose Carter, still weak from her condition, teased her daughter. "Don't tell me you've gone and fallen for a billionaire." Vanessa laughed it off, but her stomach tightened. It wasn't supposed to be real. Meanwhile, Julian's world collided with hers in ways she hadn't anticipated. His stylists descended on her tiny apartment, filling it with gowns and jewelry that cost more than she could imagine. She rolled her eyes, choosing the simplest dress, a deep blue that felt like her, not a costume. She insisted on doing her own makeup, refusing to be polished into someone else's image. Julian, for his part, found himself nervous in ways he hadn't expected. He had been preparing for this wedding as though it were a battle, rehearsing backstories, coaching Vanessa on names and faces. But late at night, when he lay awake in his penthouse, his mind didn't dwell on Catherine anymore. It dwelled on Vanessa's laugh, her blunt honesty, the way she had refused to be impressed by him. The night before the ceremony, they dined together to finalize their story. "In the quiet of the limousine," he confessed, "I thought I was nervous about Catherine. But really, I'm nervous about bringing you into that room. They'll judge you. They'll try to tear you apart." Vanessa met his eyes, unflinching. "I've been judged my whole life. I can handle them. The question is, can you?" Julian smiled faintly. For the first time, he wondered if he had chosen her to protect himself, or if he already wanted her there for reasons that had nothing to do with Catherine. The wedding day dawned with cruel perfection. The sun lit the city in gold, the kind of day when everything sparkled as though planned for photographs. Julian's car wound its way through Central Park toward the church, the limousine's leather interior silent except for the rhythmic tapping of his finger on the armrest. When they pulled up, the scale of the event became clear. The church doors stood wide, and the stone steps were lined with guests in couture gowns and bespoke suits. Photographers loitered at the edges, hoping for shots worth selling. Julian's jaw tightened. These were Catherine's people, the same socialites who had once welcomed him when he was with her and turned colder once she left. Then the door opened, and Vanessa stepped out. For a heartbeat, Julian forgot why he was there. The deep blue gown hugged her frame, her hair swept up in a style that showed the line of her neck. She looked nothing like the women inside, yet somehow more striking than all of them combined. He offered his arm, and she slipped hers through it with steady grace. "Relax," she whispered, as they began the climb up the steps. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad." "That's not far off," Julian muttered. Inside, the air smelled of roses and candle wax. Guests turned immediately, whispers crackling through the pews like static. "That's Julian Blackwood." "Who's the woman?" "She doesn't look like one of us." Julian held himself tall, but his grip on Vanessa's arm tightened. She leaned toward him with a smile meant for the crowd, as if he had whispered something private. "Breathe," she murmured. "We're supposed to look like we're enjoying ourselves." He forced a smile, and for the first time in months it didn't feel entirely fake. The ceremony began. Catherine appeared at the back, glowing in white lace, her veil trailing like a river of silk. Gasps filled the church at her beauty. Julian's chest tightened, but not with longing, more with the weight of memory. He had loved her once deeply. But now, as he felt Vanessa's hand resting lightly in his, he realized he wasn't breaking. He was steady. When Catherine's eyes met his across the crowd, she faltered for a fraction of a second. Her gaze flicked to Vanessa, standing beside him, and then her smile hardened back into place. The reception at the plaza was everything Julian had expected. Excess wrapped in elegance. Golden chandeliers sparkled, crystal glasses lined the tables, and a string quartet played from the corner. Guests floated across the room like actors on a stage, each smile perfectly rehearsed. Vanessa had never stepped into a world like this, but she carried herself with unshakable calm, her head high as Julian introduced her to a parade of acquaintances. "Melissa Worthington," Julian said, as a woman dripping in diamonds leaned forward with an air kiss. "An old friend of Catherine's." Melissa's eyes skimmed Vanessa from head to toe with thinly veiled curiosity. "Girlfriend?" she repeated. "How wonderful. And what do you do, Vanessa?" Before Vanessa could answer, Julian spoke smoothly. "She's an educator, brilliant with children." Vanessa's lips twitched. He wasn't lying, but the way he said it sounded grander than her calf shifts and part-time tutoring. Melissa smiled a little too tightly. How noble. "Well, enjoy the evening." She drifted away, already whispering to another guest. Julian exhaled, lowering his voice. "That's just the beginning. They'll all be sizing you up tonight." "Let them," Vanessa replied evenly, sipping her champagne. "Their opinion doesn't pay my bills." Her strength steadied him. He had entered this ballroom prepared to endure judgment, but now he realized he wasn't enduring it alone. Then came Catherine. She swept toward them on Charles's arm, her gown glistening under the chandeliers. Up close, her perfection was almost blinding. Yet when she looked at Julian, her smile wavered. "Julian," she said, her voice too sweet. "You came?" "Of course," he replied calmly. "Congratulations to you both." He slipped an arm around Vanessa's waist. "Catherine? Charles. This is Vanessa Carter." Catherine's eyes flickered. "Lovely to meet you. Julian has mentioned you before." "We've been keeping things private," Vanessa said smoothly, her smile warm but unreadable. Julian values his personal life, especially after she let the words hang. Catherine's jaw tightened. For the first time that evening, Julian felt he had the upper hand. He looked at Vanessa, his chest tightening with gratitude. She wasn't just holding her own. She was shielding him. Later, Catherine found him again. "One dance," she said, her hand already reaching for his. Julian hesitated. Vanessa's eyes met his from across the room, calm but watchful. With a nod, she gave silent permission. Reluctantly, Julian followed Catherine onto the dance floor. The music was slow, the crowd watching. Catherine slipped easily into his arms, just like she once had. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she murmured. "I almost didn't," Julian admitted. "But you did," she said, her eyes scanning his face. "And you brought her." Julian didn't flinch. "She's very real. And yes, I'm happy." Catherine studied him. "She's different from your usual type." "Maybe that's why it works," Julian replied. For a flicker, Catherine's flawless mask cracked. "Charles is stable, steady. Exactly what I need." Julian heard what she didn't say, not what she wanted. For a long moment, their eyes locked, both recognizing the truth they had avoided. Their love had been passion, yes, but also destruction. Perhaps they had needed each other once, but not anymore. As the song ended, Julian stepped back. "I hope you'll be happy," he said sincerely. And for the first time in years, he meant it. Julian returned to find Vanessa on the terrace, the night air cool around her shoulders. She turned as he approached. "So," she asked quietly, "that dance with her, was it for show? Or did it mean something?" Julian hesitated, then answered honestly. "It wasn't for me. The only thing that felt real tonight was you." Her eyes softened, and the tension between them thickened. They slipped away early, ducking out during the cake cutting. The limousine carried them not to another glittering venue, but to a dimly lit pizzeria downtown. There, in tuxedo and gown, they shared greasy slices and laughed like old friends. Julian watched her bite into her food, unbothered by appearances, and felt something inside him shift. When they stepped outside, under the neon glow, he kissed her. Not for anyone else, not for show, just because he wanted to. The days that followed tested them. Julian's phone rang endlessly. Crises in London, deals in Dubai, board members demanding his presence. 3 days passed without him calling Vanessa. She told herself not to care, but every vibration of her phone made her heart jump. When he finally appeared at her door, guilt in his eyes, she crossed her arms. "You promised you'd call. I guess billionaires don't keep promises." He didn't defend himself with arrogance. Instead, he admitted, "I don't know how to do this. I've spent so long building empires that I forgot how to just show up for someone." That honesty broke her anger. "Then learn," she said quietly, "because I don't need palaces. I just need presence." For Julian, it was a turning point. He began carving time out of his schedule, deliberately choosing dinners with her over late-night calls. For Vanessa, it was terrifying to let herself believe this wasn't temporary. But slowly, she did. Months later, the roles had reversed. Vanessa now stood in the spotlight, speaking at a foundation gala about expanding access to education. Julian watched from the crowd, pride softening his usually stern face. Later that night, in a quiet garden, he handed her a small velvet box. She braced herself for a ring. Instead, inside lay a golden key. "A key?" she asked, puzzled. "To your own apartment," he explained softly. "Next to the foundation. Yours. Because love shouldn't feel like a cage. I don't want you with me because you have no choice. I want you with me because you choose to be." Tears filled her eyes. Even after months together, he was still giving her what no one else had: freedom. He pulled out a second box then, this one holding a ring. "Not for now. Not unless you're ready. Just someday." Vanessa looked at him, holding both the key and the ring. "I already made my choice," she whispered. "And it's you." Under the stars, she kissed him. And in that moment, both of them knew. The billionaire who had once walked into a wedding brokenhearted had walked out of it with something far greater. The kind of love that wasn't built on appearances or power, but on truth.